Hey guys, welcome to this series on how to make a YouTube playlist app using the YouTube API. Okay guys, so here we have the app that we're going to be creating today. Simple YouTube playlist app that pulls in all the information using the YouTube API, including these thumbnails here, the title, description, even the video. So basically what it does is I've created a playlist here on my YouTube channel, and the link for all the stuff I give you links for will be in the description. And there's 12 videos in here. So this playlist will be pulled into our app. You can see the order is the same in our app here. It will be pulled in using the YouTube API, right? Cool, so let's get started. So the first thing we want to do, we probably want to create this central div here in the middle where it's white. Then this div is built into sections. So there's a header, another section, and the main bit. So let's build that section. So jump into CodePen. First thing, I just want you to check that you have a few things ready. So jump into the settings cog at the side of the CSS. And make sure you have normalize and auto prefix on. These will just help your the app just look the way it should in different applications. So save and close that, and we're ready to go. So let's create this central div, and we're using emit again. So instead of writing div with a class equals container, etc., we're just going to say .container. And hit the tab button, and there we go. It's written the div out for us. So inside the container, we have the header where the logo sits, so we can just say header tab. And we have a section where the video sits, so we're going to say section. Then we're going to say hashtag video and hit tab. And emit has given us a section tag, because we just said section, there was no dot or hash in front of that, but then we followed it with hash video. So that said, hey, the ID is going to be video because hash is ID. Then we're going to have a main section, right, where all the list type items are. So let's start by giving the background its color. So body, we want a background, a color of EEE, so very slightly darker white, basically. That's because our container is white. So let's give it a width of 560 pixels. Let's give it a height of 100 viewport height, VH, right? And what that means is all the visible area of the screen, so not when you scroll down or sideways, this is the viewport, this is what you can view. So 100 VH is 100% of the screen, and VW is view width, so that's 100% width-wise. Right, we still can't see it, so let's give it a background color of hash FFF. So that's the same as saying hash F 6 times, or writing white. So now we can see we've got a little bit of a block here on the left. Let's put that down the middle by saying margin. We want 0 margin at the top and bottom, but on the left and right we want it to be the same. So that would center it because they have to be the same. So that's auto. Cool. So the next thing we should do is probably, let's put this logo in here, right? So I'll have the link to the logo in the description. I'm just going to copy it here. So we're going to say IMG, because we're using emit. We want it to have a class. So .logo. This is so in the CSS we can change it. Then hit tab. We want then to fill out the src with the actual location of the image. So here's the location for me, and it's a bit too big. So let's change that. Let's go to logo in the CSS. Let's change it to width 120 pixels. Right, that's cool. So that's getting better. But if you notice on here, when we scroll up, this and the header, the video and the header stays in the same place, right? And if we did that now, you can see the YouTube is disappearing. So let's fix that before we go any further. So I'm just going to go above the logo and say, yo, header tags, I want you to stay fixed to the top. So we say position fixed, right? Doesn't look like it did that much, but if I scroll now, and I'm scrolling, you can see the scroll bar here, it's staying where it is. Right, okay, so let's make this image centralized. We can do that by saying text align center, right? He says. So we need to give it, so it is centered. So if I go background color red, you'll see the actual background of it is only a small amount, and we want it to be the full width, right? So we want it to be also 560 pixels, because when you make something fixed, you're taking out the flow of the document. So normally with a div, you'd go header, main, and it'd carry on going down the page one after another. What fixed has done is it's taken out that flow, and it's just saying, hey, I'm just going to stay at the top because you told me to. So with that, it has got rid of its width that it would inherit from the container it was in, right? So anything it inherit has got rid of. So width 560 pixels, and now that text align works. Look, if I take that off, it goes across there, because now it knows what width it has. Right, that's good for now. So let's put in that video, right? And the way you can get this video embedded, you can do it straight from YouTube. So if I jump into YouTube, this is our playlist, and I click on one of the videos, and this is with any video, right? And you go down here to, just zoom in a little bit, share, and click on that, you'll see this embed. And this is the whole link, this is the whole code even to what we need. So you can copy it out of there, or I'll link it as well, or whatever video you want. And we can just basically, inside this section of the ID of video, we can just paste that in there. Right? But it looks a little bit funny, right? So the video is scrolling, and we don't want that to happen. And this header is kind of sitting on top of it. So why don't we make this section the same position fixed as the header? Well, it also needs the width, and the text align doesn't really matter to it. So why don't we just tag on to here by saying :section. So now these have both the same things going on, and then I scroll, the video stays there. But you can see that now the header has disappeared underneath it, because in the HTML, the section has come after the header, so it says, well, we're the same, we're both fixed, the hierarchy is the same, but I actually come lower down than you in the HTML, so I'm going to sit on top of you. So the way we can fix that is say, okay, header, okay, section. We actually need you to start lower down the page. So we want you to, at the top, be 50 pixels away from the top. And there we go. Just let it breathe a little bit. How about we give some padding to this YouTube logo? So let's go to .logo and say padding 10 pixels. And it actually has 10 pixels on the left and the right as well. But it doesn't affect it, so we're going to leave it. It saves us writing it out like 0 pixels here, right? It's the same thing. We don't need it. So 10 pixels. Looking pretty good. I scroll and it stays where it is, right? That's important. Okay, so now on to the main section. What we want to do here is we need an image and the details. So we could probably fit these in just one container and split this container in two, right? So we're going to do that very semantically. Jump into our HTML and we're going to create an article and hit tab. An article is just a very semantic way of basically saying this is kind of the main container of what holds our content. You can use it in different ways, but for this, where we're going to use multiple articles so we know what they are. They're an article, right? So what we need to do with article then, we need to give it two things. It needs an image, so img with a class of thumb, hit tab, and we're gonna fill in that source. I've got a link here. I'll leave you the link in the description and put that right here in the source. And now you see a problem. We'll carry on. We also want a container, a div with a class of, I don't know, details. Hit tab. And then this div will have a h4. That's going to hold our title. And a p, so the p tab. And that's going to be our description. So I am a description. Right. So that's all the article needs to have, right? So it needs an image tag inside an article and a div with details inside an article. And as you can see, it's right up here now. And the header doesn't seem to have a background. So there's a couple of things we need to do. Jump into our CSS. And for this header, so this is header and section, we can just give it a background color of that white color, which is 3Fs, hashtag 3Fs. Now it's disappeared, but we know the article's still hiding back here. So you've got to remember the article, the main section, this main section here, is in the flow of the page still. Now the section and this header have jumped out of the main flow. So effectively, main is the first thing on the page. That's still in the flow, so that is at the top as well. So what we can do then for that is we can give main some padding to bring it down. Oh, sorry, main, curly brackets, padding. And we want to give it something like, so it's got a big padding from the top. So it's going to be like 370 pixels from the top, right? But we also wanted to have some on the sides, so 18 pixels. And we don't want the bottom to be 370. So we can just give the bottom 10 pixels. And if we end it there, 18 pixels will work for left and right because we haven't specified the left side after the bottom. And that's fine to do. Right, so now it's actually visible. The image is a little bit big, so why don't we deal with that? Why don't we say the thumb, because we give the image a class of thumb. We want you to be height of 70 pixels. Right, that's looking pretty good. And you can do it width if you want. But I think because some of the thumbnails are different aspect ratios. So I think it just looks better that they're all the same height. So that's what I did on this. So we're getting there. We're getting closer now. now we need this div container here to be at the side here. So we're going to do that by jumping into our article, and we need to say, yo, article, why don't you display as a flexbox container? So display flex, and as you can see, it's come at the side of it. It's a little bit disjointed, right? This is kind of down. The reason is because these have their own margins and paddings, the P and the H4. So let's pull them off now. Let's do some styling of the typography. We're going to do it at the top because I like to have my typography out of the way at the top. So the way we do this, we're going to use something in SCSS. It's called a mixin. And basically what that does is it gives you some prearranged code which then you can use over and over again. So it's kind of like a variable, but in CSS. So to do this, we want to basically say, we're creating a mixin, so at mixin, then we're going to give it a name. So we want to create a section of code called font base, which we can then import into multiple CSS blocks. So we want to take off the padding, right? And we want to take off the margin. And we want to do a few other things. We want to give it a line height of 1.3, which is basically, if this paragraph carried on going down, the distance between the actual bottom of this line and the top of the next line, that's the line height. So we've just increased it effectively by 0.3. And we want to then say font weight 600 to make it bold. Now you notice nothing happened here. That's because we haven't called font base. So let's do that. So we're saying, hey, H4, we want you to be to include font base. So the way you do it, you say at include, so you include in it, then just call the name, font base. And you can see that just jumped up then because now it has the padding and everything else taken off it. The P tag, we also want that to be including our font base. So include font base, and watch what it does. Boom, there you go. But now they're the same, and in our visual, this is grey and smaller. So let's do grey and smaller then. Let's do that now. So colour, which is how you get the font colour. Just gonna call it grey because I know that's a good colour. And we want to make the text smaller, so we're going to say font size 0.7 rem. There we go, smaller. And we're using rem, which is the relative elements. So it's relative to the browser default size. So most browsers 16 pixels default font size. So we're saying be 0.7 of that. Right, okay, so it's not looking bad. Let's add a few more of these articles in here. Let's just copy and paste this article. Copy. Alright, so we're just copy and pasting notes down the page. Here we go. So we need to now start adjusting some paddings, right? So the way we're going to do that is our article. So if we jump down to our article is only display flex at the moment. So it needs a few things. We want this details to sit in the middle of kind of the whole article. So we can say align items center, and that aligns centrally. You see it just moved down? We need to give it some of that padding. So we need to say padding. We want to be padded at 8 pixels at the top and 12 pixels left and right. So that's looking a bit closer. now we need a little bit more gap here. Notice how we have a little gap here. So we want to do that on the video description, right? So we'll just go underneath the thumb to keep in the right thing. So we want to say dot details. We want to say, yo, dot details, give us some padding. You can give us 8 pixels at the top and bottom and 22 pixels at the left and right side, which pulls it away. Cool. It's looking very close. So now we need to just do this hover, right? Have this nice little blue hover over it. So we can go into article and we can use another CSS helper, which is and or ampersand hover. That basically says article will replace the and. So in CSS you would normally say article hover. You'd do it that way. You don't need to do that in SCSS. You can just say and hover, and it knows you're dealing with whatever you're inside of, because we're still inside of these curly brackets, right? So and hover. So the article's hover. We want to have a border of 2 pixels solid, and we want this red color, which is hash FF9999, right? So now when we hover, there you go. But it's looking a little funky when they're kind of moving about. And that's because you're adding a border when you hover over it. So you're adding to the size of the article. So what you can do is just say border, this is on the article itself, 2 pixels solid white. Or we can use that FFF. It's totally up to you, it's the same. So now it already has a border on it, but you can't see it. So when we hover over it, it doesn't jump about. Right, we need to round the edges of this little red container and our thumbnails. So let's do that. Let's say border dash radius 8 pixels for this little red thing. There you go, it's looking pretty cool. And we want to do that on our thumbnail as well. So let's say border dash radius, let's say 4 pixels on this one. Okay, so 4 pixels on that one. And it's looking pretty good. We're pretty close to the end, I think. The only thing I want to do is just want to add I just want to add a margin 0 auto to my article. Just so it's going to always be in the middle of that main container. And it should be anyway, but just to be sure. Right, okay. And there you have it. We have a scrollable list. The video stays where it is, the header stays where it is, and you can scroll down. Obviously, we don't have the click functionality in yet. That's going to be dealt in the JavaScript and the jQuery in the next video. But in the next video, we're going to actually look at how to set up the API, how to get an API key, and how to make the calls and make all this information dynamic. It does mean we pull a bit of this information out of here. So you've wasted your time a little bit, but not too much, because when the result comes in, you'll see how cool it is. Okay guys, so a quick refresher. This is the application that we're making. Simple little app. We can click on the items and the video changes at the top. All this information is pulled dynamically from YouTube. And how we did that was I created a little playlist on YouTube called YouTube. And I've linked that as well, so you can get straight to that playlist. And this has 12 videos in it. And what we are doing, we're actually saying to YouTube, hey, go get this playlist. We want the image, the title, and the description, and some video information so we can display it. So let me show you first the YouTube docs. So here we are. The link for this is in the description as well. And we're interested in playlist items and a list of those playlist items. You can see on the left here. But you can see there's all sorts here. There's channels, comments, you can get comments from them, subscriptions, thumbnails, lots of information we can pull from the YouTube API. So, what we're going to do is we're going to have a little play. So I'm going to click on JavaScript here. And I know there's different bits of information you can get. I know we just want snippet. So I'm just going to say, yeah, take snippet. We've got 12 videos, but we can bring back 20 videos to our playlist. And what we need to do is, if we put in our playlist ID here, which is this for me, I'll put this in the link as well so you can use it. And if we click execute, you can see here, create a weather app using an API, part 1 HTML. We go down all the thumbnail stuff here. Again, part 2 here. And all the videos are listed here. So it's made that request for us in the documentation. So we can actually see if this is going to work. And if the information coming back is what we actually want. And it is, so that's cool. And it sends that request to this URL here. So we're going to do the same. And to do that, first of all, we need the YouTube API enabled, and we also need an API key, so effectively a password, right? So how we do that is I've given you a link to this in the description. We need to go to, let me find this really quick. We're going to go to this, which is your developer's console, right? What's actually there? So it should, when you come here on the link, on the developer's console link, it'll be something like this. You might not have all these boxes, but don't worry just yet. What I need you to do is, next to where it says Google APIs, new project, I need you to click on there. Yours probably doesn't say new project. But whatever is at the side of Google APIs, click on it and click this little plus symbol right here, right? Because you want to create a new project. Type whatever your project name is in. I'm not going to do it because I already have one. Click create. Then that'll create it for you. There might be a little bit of a time delay. You might have to wait for it to go through the process of it. But after a minute or so, you should be able to then select your project from in here. So I'm going to select new project. And then we want to enable the YouTube API. So we do that by just clicking enable APIs and services right here and searching. So we're going to search YouTube, and there's 4 APIs here. We want YouTube Data API v3, right? Because this is just provides information from such as videos, playlists, etc. So click on that one and click the big blue enable button. It'll do this spinny thing and it'll take a while to enable it again. But once it's enabled, what we need to do is we then need to get an API key, which is effectively the password. So if you watched the last video we did, the weather app video, you'll know that we could just send the request and get information back. This time we don't have that ability. We need to send with it our information. So on the left hand side, you can see credentials. So just click that. You see I've got one listed here already. But you can create credentials right here, this little blue thing. And you want to create API key. So click on that. And there's a new API key, right? So you can just copy that out of there. And that's what we're going to be using, okay? So, where do we start? Let's jump into our code. And let's make this request. Let's just move this JS right up here. So we're using jQuery, so make sure we've got jQuery installed by clicking the little cog at the side of the JS, which is a settings cog. Go to quick add at the bottom. You see I've got it in my recents, jQuery. You might have it down here. It's jQuery there. So click on that, save and close, and jQuery is installed, ready to use, right? So how do we start this off? Well, we need to start it off with a container for jQuery to work in. So we say $ for hey jQuery, we're about to use you. So you're saying when the document, so that's the page, is the document. When that document is ready, I want you to do something. So doing something is a function, curly brackets, and that's the container for jQuery, right? So now we can start running jQuery stuff instead of just plain JavaScript, which makes the API call a lot easier. So what we want to do first is we want to just set it up so we have the information at our fingertips to use later. So let's set it up for using our API key. So let's create a variable called key. And what we want to do is we want to just copy and paste. So copy and paste from your credentials, your key. We want to copy and paste that straight into our document, into our variable here. So that's my key. Now, we also need the playlist ID to send it to, right? So let's go and get that playlist ID. So if I go to the playlist, so this is the actual playlist page, look. The way you can get the ID is going to the address bar at the top. And the last little bit where it says list equals, after the equals, that's the playlist ID. So let's copy that out of there. Or I'll put the link in the description for you. And let's call this var playlist ID equals, and put that in quotes. There we go, playlist ID. Now, the last bit of information is where the API call, is, right? What we're actually sending the API call to. So we go back to the documents, the YouTube docs, and that was here, look. So we filled all this stuff in before. This is the request, HTTP request. I'll link this in the description also. And what we can do is then just copy that. And we'll make another variable called URL. And we'll set it in between quotes. And there we go. That's our 3 bits of information ready to get everything else going. Right, and with these, we've got one actual piece of information we also need to send with it, which is the options. So if you look back here, we are sending a few bits of information. We're sending snippet, which basically gets us things like thumbnail, title, etc. Our max results, so 20, whatever, and a playlist ID. And when you send all this information to here, along with your API key, then it will send the response. But all these are options, so we actually need to send that with the request. So let's create another variable, and in this variable, call it options, is going to be an object, because this is what the YouTube API expects to receive. So it's an object, and the object is going to have a few things. So it's going to have that part, and that part was called snippet, right? It also needs our key, which we have at the top. So we're just basically copying it into here now. So key, and we're going to access the key variable to this place here. It needs to know how many results we want. So max results, max results. we said 20, but you know, we have 12 in our playlist, but it's the maximum, so it's fine. And then we also need to know which playlist it is going to get the information for. So all the stuff on the left is stuff YouTube has specified the names of. So you see it all here. You know, parameters here, playlist ID, max results, tells you all about it in the docs. And we're just basically sending what it wants. So playlist ID is coming straight from this variable. Right. So onto the request. So we want to say, hey, let's create a function, and it's going to load the vids, right? So it's going to load our videos, load vids. And what that actually is going to do is going to send a request. So $, so we're using jQuery here. So we're saying, hey jQuery, you have a function called getJSON. Let's use that. It's already built in. It's a pre-made code. But I need a few bits of information with this. So YouTube needs a few bits of information. It needs a URL, which we have. We've already got that. So URL. I also need a bunch of options, including the key, etc. So we have that. So we're going to say options, and then it's going to take that from that variable. And after I've sent the request and you give me the options, I'm going to return something. So I need to do something. So doing is a function. So I'm going to do something after I return the data. But you need to tell me what you want this data to be called. So within this parentheses, we're going to type data. We can call this whatever we want, but it needs to be able to access it. We need a name to be able to access it. So let's console log this data, right? And we also need to call the function. So call it load vids. So we're calling it above it and the function is underneath, right? Let's see what happens. Fuck's sake, son. So we'll inspect the element so we can get to the console. Here we go in our console. I just need to get to logs. So here we are, logs. I'll zoom in. You see right here, there's an object. If we open this object, you can see, oh, there's items in here. Oh, from 0 to 11, so there's 12 items. So this is going to be our information, right? Snippet. There we go. We asked for that. And it's telling us our channel title, the channel title of the playlist. Create a weather app. Thumbnails are in here as well. Video IDs in here. So this is giving us everything we need right here. So what should we do first? Why don't we'll just close this off. Why don't we dynamically change this video to the very first video in the playlist? So instead of writing it out in the HTML like this, we can now get rid of the iframe. So delete the iframe from your HTML because we're actually going to create that dynamically from the API. So how to do that? Well, we need it to be a new function, right? So we're going to call this, I guess, function main vid. And this main vid function is basically going to find the container for that, which is section with an ID of vid. So it's going to find that, and then it's going to inject something into it. So let's say, hey jQuery, $, find something called video. I think that's called hashtag video. So find something called hash video. And what I want you to do is, I want you to change the HTML that's within those tags to something new, right? So I'm going to use backticks to do this. Just going to make sure I've copied it correctly from here. So Control X. And basically backticks allows us to inject variables directly into the string, rather than having to close the string, add a plus sign, add a variable, add another plus sign, open a string up. Backticks, not quotes, they're backticks, lets us just do that, lets us even have spaces, so line breaks, and it doesn't affect it. So let's just copy and paste our iframe from our HTML into the document. Right, it's a bit of a long thing. So we're kind of cool now, right? So I'm just going to get rid of this playlist information here, actually. So it's actually ready to run. So we just need to run this main video function from inside here. So we're basically saying, make the API call, then load this function called main_vid. There you go. Then once main_vid is run, find the video section and inject this HTML. But this isn't dynamic yet, right? Because we have this hard-coded ID here. So what we need to do is, and this is why we use backticks, delete, after it says embed /, delete that bit of code to the quotes, right? Delete that. And I want you to add $, curly brackets, ID. Just make sure your curly brackets end up closing. So now it's looking for a variable called ID. So we need to supply it. So what we need to do is, we need to send ID to it. So we're sending ID, then we're going to name it here, saying, yo, you're going to receive something called ID so you can use it. Now, we need to find the ID of, let's say the second one, because it's a different color. We're going to find actually no, we'll do the first one. We need to find the ID of the first video in the playlist. So the way we do that is we say, create a variable called ID, and set that equal to data. Now we need to go find out where it is. So inspect element. Let's go to console. Here's my logs again. So data is object, because this is what we named it. So this is our very root element. So data, then we need to go into items, because items is an array, it's not an object. So the 0th item in that array. Then, this is not the video ID. You need to go into snippet. Then we need to go to resource ID and video ID. So it's quite a long path. So let's see if I remember it. Data.snippet. Data.items. Was it? Items. At the 0th position. Then we want to jump inside snippet. Then there was the resource ID. Then there was the video ID, right? And that's what we want. And there you go. So we've created a variable called ID, which has got the video ID, passed it to mainvid, then mainvid here has used it within the string. So that's pretty cool, right? We're getting that dynamically now. Okay, so the next thing to do, we need to get all these filled out. So we need to kind of say, hey, for each item in that array, we want to do something. So how are we going to do this? We want to loop through each item in that array. So let's create another function. So that's the main video function. Let's create a function called results loop. Right. What results loop is going to do is it's going to basically add each one of these pre-made. So it's not going to inject the thumbnail, then inject the title, then inject the description. It's going to make this up here, then put it in. So we're going to make the HTML up in here. So let's do that then. So we're basically going to copy, we're going to cut one of these articles out. So cut an article, then you can actually delete every other one of the articles, right? We don't need the articles anymore. So we've got one in our clipboard. So what the results loop does is it says, hey, I want you to select the main container. So we're doing that with jQuery. So select the main container. And what I need you to do is change the, this is not what we're doing. We're not changing the HTML, but I'll show you what you might think. So we want to change the HTML using those backticks instead of quotes. A couple of new lines. And we want you to add this article thing, right? So if we call results loop now, so we want to do the API call, change the main video, and once we change the main video, we then want to add stuff to that main section. So we call results, I think, loop from inside our call. And there you go, it's added one of those things. So what we actually wanted to do is we want to say like, okay, so for each one of these items, we want you to add another one and another one, right? So the results loop needs to fill this information out with its dynamic data. So let's send all the data to results loop. So then results loop, let's say, look, you're getting this data in. Now results loop wants to run through these things, so it needs to create its own thumbnail. So let's call var thumb and set that equal to, well, let's have a look. Inspect element. So console. Let's have a look where it is. So we need to go inside an item array, and the thumbnail is inside items, inside snippet, inside thumbnails, right? And we're going to take the medium one, I think. Yeah, medium. Then it's URL, right? So it's quite a long path. So the thumbnail is called, and we want to basically go into the data. Now we need to go into an item, then we need to go into the snippet, then into the thumbnails, then into the medium, God, I can't spell, medium, then into URL. Now there's a problem with this. So let's try and replace this URL of the thumbnail, which is in the source tag, using, delete it using $, curly brackets, then putting the thumb in there, then close curly brackets if you haven't closed them. Now it hasn't done it. And the reason it's not done it is because item needed a position, right? Because it was in an array. Because there's multiples of these things. So if I did give it a position of 0, it would pull that in. So select the main, variable form, data, item, the 0th position. Where have I gone wrong here? Snippet, item, medium.url. Let's have an inspect on this. So object, items, the 0th item, snippet. Right, okay. So items, there we go. So that will work, right? But I have to specify the location. So what we need to do is, for doing this for one item, you don't want to be copying and changing this one. We can use for each loop, or in jQuery, it's just called an each loop. So let's set up that each loop. So we're saying, hey jQuery, for each, and this is a jQuery built-in function. JavaScript has the same for each. So we're saying for each data, so the data you gave me, so for each of the data in the items array, now items array has multiple, has 12, right? So we're saying for each of those 12, I want you to do something, so function, right? So this is our function. What I want you to do is, I is the number you're on, so 0, 1, 2, all the way to 11 in our case. I want you to go through and rename, they're all called item now, so I can access them saying item. So let's take this variable called thumb, let's move this inside. And let's also take this main with the .html, right? We'll take this, cut that, and we'll go inside here, right? So still doing the same thing. But why don't we replace this 0? We don't need that anymore. We need to now say, hey, you're already looping through these items, right? So I'll let you do that. So instead of writing data item 0, if we just write item, that's changed now. But it's only changed once. So effectively it's looping through each of the items and changing the inner HTML. So on the 11th time, that's the last one. So that's the last thing it does. We don't want that to happen. This is what I was saying earlier. We want to not change the inner HTML. We want to append a new bit of that onto the DOM each time. So change .html to .append and see what it does. There we go. So now we need to fix that, but now we have all the thumbnails at least. So now we have the thumbnails, let's do it for everything else. So let's call var title. We want to set the title equals to item dot snippet dot title, because that's where it is in that object when we go look in the console. So now title is that. Why don't we change what's in between the H4 tags? Let's delete where we wrote title. $, curly brackets, title, and just make sure you finish with curly brackets. You see all the titles are now dynamically here. right? Same with description. Let's do that. So var desc equals item.snippet.description, right? Then let's go into the p tag, delete everything within the p tag, $, curly brackets, desc, closing curly brackets, and there we have it. But they're giant, right? We don't want that much of a description in these things. So we can use JavaScript to remove everything over 100 characters, right? And how we do that is we say, go to our desk variable, and at the very end, just before the semicolon, just type substring, lowercase substring, and it needs 2 arguments. It needs to know where it starts. So it starts at the very first letter, 0, and for how long. So 100 letters. There we are. We've cut it down dramatically now. So the only thing left to do is when we click on one of these, because at the moment it doesn't do anything, we need to update that video. And we actually need to pull some information from the API so it knows where to go. So let's do that. So let's say we're going to actually say, hey, when the main is clicked on, find out what has been clicked on in that main and change the video. So it looks a little something like this. So select the thing called main, and when it is clicked, so .on, so this is basically saying it's an event. What event is it going to be? So when it's clicked, you can do something. So function, right? And let me show you this. So let's do alert hello. Hopefully it lets me do this in CodePen. So when I click on the main, it should say hello, right? There you go. And it's going to go through it 11 times maybe? I didn't expect that. So we don't want that to happen, right? Because we could say when the article is clicked on. But we don't want to add multiple event handlers for each item because we don't know how many items we're going to do. And that's why we're using main. So we're saying when we click on main, what I actually want you to do is I want you to dig down to find the article element, right? Because the article has the information we want, right? And don't forget the comma there before the function. So we need to, when it's clicked on, we need to send some information back to the main video function, right? Because that's what changes that video. So we need to find the ID of that video. So whenever we click on one of these, we need to find the ID of that video. But we haven't given these articles that ID. So we need to do that, right? So this is how we do that. In this article, so in our main.append, we want to give it a class, right? Let's call it class item, right? And we also want to inject the video ID into that article. And this is how we do it. We are making something called a data key. And we want to say, hey, $, curly brackets, vid, end your curly brackets and your quotes. So what's happening here is we have now made this extra calling for a vid variable. So let's create that. Var vid equals. And what does the vid equal? It actually equals the video ID. Right? So let's put that in. So item.snippet dot resource ID dot video ID. Now that's where the video ID is in. If you console logged it, that's where it is, right? So now this data key holds the video ID. So if we go back to this event listener that we're making, where we can click on the main, it will dig down to the article, and now it's digged its way down to the article. We can pull out that video ID because it's stored in the data key of the article, right? So let's create a variable called ID, and ID wants to be, you want to basically select this element. So we've clicked on it, it's dug down to the article. So select this and select this items, basically this article's element called data dash key, right? So select that data key, right, which will be individual for each video. And we could then say, why don't you alert? Why don't we alert the ID? So let's see. So hopefully this works. So when I click on this one, it's giving me this ID, look. And it's going to go through them. It's going to go through it 11 times. Okay, brilliant. That is because, let's fix this now, shall we? That is because we have written this main. This is my fault, I should have been clearer. So this whole on-click event listener, we have written this inside this append, right? So we've written it inside this each loop. We don't want it inside that each loop. In fact, we want this just out on its own. So copy it. So alert ID is your last thing. You have a curly brackets and parentheses and a colon. Cut that out. Right, so that was my bad. So that can actually live right down at the bottom. Just leave your jQuery container stuff clear. So I'm just going to delete some of this space. Oops. And just copy and paste it in there. Right, looking better. Right, cool. So now, when I click on one of these, it shouldn't do it 11 times. Once. There we go. So that's because I wrote this accidentally still inside of this each loop. So saying, okay, each time I click on the main, for when I click on the main, for each one of these items, I want you to alert. And that's what it was doing. That's why it kept going on and going on. So now we don't want to alert the ID. What we want to do is we want to call this main video, because we can pass in an ID and the ID will change and it will update the HTML. It will update the video, right? So let's call it. Let's call main vid, and let's send that new variable, this data key, let's send it in its parentheses to that function again. And this we should be very close here. So when I click on this, here we go. Now it's changing. And that's pretty much all there is to it. Few little things, I guess. When we scroll down, we saw this, you know, the white stuff has ended, right? So we can just go into our CSS. And I think this was because we set a height VH here. So we can take that off. And there you go, straight to the bottom, no VH. Clicking through, and they all work. We probably don't need the console log now in where was it? When it comes into our load vids, we can delete that. You don't really have that in production code. There you go. I hope that was easy enough for you, clear enough to follow. So we pulled in all the information we needed to use in variables. We sent the request in functions load, and the load called it. And we basically said, hey, YouTube URL, here's your settings, your options. Now return me something called data with all the information in it. Then we called the main vid, which took the ID from the very first video and loaded it. This is main vid right underneath. Went to the HTML and injected with the new ID from this 0th position into it. We then call the results loop. Just taking out space and stuff. And basically the results loop took in the data from that API call. And for each item, it created variables of what we needed. Then appended to the main, so didn't change the main, the whole HTML. It added to the main each time an article. This is the article. Just go across. Add an article to it with the dynamic data for each array item. So, you know, each in the items, it was an array, had 12 different items. So go through that each time, putting these variables in place, and then when I click, dig down to the article, find the data key within inside this article, then call that main video again with the new ID, and that's why it updates. Okay guys, I hope that wasn't too difficult like I said earlier, and I hope you got a lot out of it. Please comment, subscribe and like the video. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video.